I was having a conversation with Paul Gallant earlier today about how much he hates draft talk. And if you guys know Paul Gallant, you know that he hates draft talk because of all the uncertainty and all of the speculation and also the cocksuredness of people in their draft opinions. And I share a lot of Paul's same reservations, but Paul has his own way of getting particularly agitated about it, which makes him very entertaining. I am at that spot where we're so close to the draft now, and you just start splitting hairs over the tiniest things over something that largely is just a huge crapshoot. So it's stressful. I was curious because this morning on the radio show, I'd said it seems to me like there are more Texans fans who adamantly want an offensive lineman than there are who adamantly want a wide receiver. And I put a question out on Twitter basically asking this: if you had to choose, which position are you more adamant about the Texans drafting in round one? Offensive line 72%, wide receiver 27%. And look, I understand a lot of people are going to say, no, I just want the best player available, et cetera, et cetera. If you had to choose, if you've got, maybe you love Matthew Golden and you love Tyler Booker and they're both sitting there at 25, who do you want? And I think by and large, a lot of people want offensive line simply because we've seen CJ and what it's like for him to operate, whether he has three really good wide receivers or not on the field, if he doesn't have time, if he doesn't have a run game, if he doesn't have all those things. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer there. And ideally, yeah, I lean more towards, hey, take the best player available. In my heart, what I want is an offensive lineman. Most of all, I just want them to make the right choice. But it's not always that simple, as we know. The biggest thing is, again, yeah, I love Matthew Golden. If Matthew Golden is on this team and the offensive line operates the exact same way they did last year, you don't get a chance in hell of actually being competitive or having a good offense. So if you have a good offensive lineman that helps be part of the solution, I think you get the absolute most out of whichever wide receivers are out there. And you've already got two really wide receivers. It's a matter of rounding the group out. So I tend to side more on, hey, in a perfect world, if I could make that choice for CJ Stroud and what's going to benefit CJ Stroud the most, then having a guy who's going to be a future perennial all-pro at offensive line. That's my dream world. I know it's a lot more complicated than that. And Julian Edelman on Games and Names, his podcast the other day, he had Puka Nacua on, and they discussed CJ Stroud and exactly what they thought CJ Stroud needed, what went on last year. And I think they said some things that I totally agree with, a couple little things that I think I disagree with, but, Julian Edelman obviously knows what he's talking about. Here's Julian Edelman on what he thinks went wrong for CJ Stroud last year.
Keeps on saying sophomore slump. I think he just had a tough situation where his offensive line wasn't playing particularly well. He had his best playmakers were in and out of the lineup like all year long. And it's hard for a guy to get comfortable when he's got guys in his lap trying to read the defense, and that's what he likes to do. So
it's also hard to get comfortable when you don't know any of those guys running out there.
Especially they haven't been practicing. They ain't going to be the same guy that was in training camp when they come back. That's what people don't realize. Practice time is extremely important.
Okay, so the last part there, and there's another clip of Puka Nacua that I'll add on to that. I'll address that towards the end, but I don't think practice time or familiarity with the receivers was as much the issue when guys were healthy. I very much think that Nico Collins being injured and then Tank Dell going out and Stephon Diggs being gone, yeah, that was a huge part of it, but there was never a point last season where it felt like that the consistency or the health of the receivers was really what was holding them back. It was just that even when they had all three guys, or even just two of the guys, when Nico and Stephon Diggs were both healthy and out there, it never felt like that they were firing on cylinders the way they should. The offensive line, 100% yes. I think to take that one step further, it's not just the protection. It's that CJ has demonstrated that he can throw the deep ball, and he's not afraid to be aggressive downfield. But when you're trying to run an offense that's predicated on getting some play action opportunities and you can't run the ball effectively and consistently at all, it goes above and beyond just pass protection, because they couldn't run the ball on first down. So you end up in 2nd and 10. Then your pass protection issues become even more of an issue. Then you get a false start or an illegal formation, and lo and behold, it's 2nd and 15 or 3rd and 15, and it becomes damn near impossible for anybody to operate. So much of that, yes, does boil down to the offensive line, but it also does fall on the offensive coordinator. Puka Nacua in another clip had said something similar to that you got to adjust and adapt to what you can and can't do. And they just, the old myth is that you got to have an awesome run game to set up the play action. That's not true, but you do have to have a credible run game. And defenses just by and large did not respect the Texans' run game at all. And it allowed them to just play cover 2 and to sit back and take away the deep ball. An offensive coordinator who can actually engineer and execute a run game, get the most out of the offensive line. So having an offensive line coach that can do the same, that's by far for me the biggest X factor. And that sounds absurdly simple that, hey, having a better offensive coordinator is going to make a big difference. I think it makes light years difference, especially when we talk about the run game and how can you help out your younger, even on good offensive lines. You might have 1 or 2 guys that are kind of sus, but they work well as a group. When you're in 2nd and 10 and 3rd and 10 all the time, it exaggerates the inadequacies of those offensive linemen all that much more. I don't want a rookie offensive guard who is tasked with having to sustain a pass block for 4 seconds consistently because they can't run the ball on 1st and 2nd down. I'm all for establishing a run game enough that you're credible, having those play action opportunities. But for me, that's why I lean more towards offensive line. All of it means nothing if Cole Popovich and Nick Caley don't do their job. As far as the shuffling of the players and the familiarity with the players, I don't worry about that at all. I think like CJ spends his time with his receivers in the offseason. CJ spent his time with Stefon Diggs last year, and I don't think that there's going to be as much of a getting to know you phase as there would be perhaps in other situations. Obviously, with Nico Collins, you don't have to worry about that. I think it's with Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk would be the one that, is he going to be as quick and easy in assimilation as it was with Stefon Diggs? I don't think it's realistic to expect that he would be, just because Stefon Diggs is Stefon freaking Diggs. Christian Kirk, he can work as hard as he can and spend a lot of time with CJ in the offseason. The fact of the matter is Stefon Diggs was also just an eminently gifted wide receiver and an eminently veteran wide receiver who could teach CJ a bunch. So there might be a little bit of a learning curve there. I think Tank Dell, in my mind, and I know I've seen a lot of people say that they're not quite sure exactly what to expect or what they should expect out of Tank Dell. In my mind, I don't expect Tank Dell to play this year. If he does play, I'll be pleasantly surprised if he's the same version of himself before this injury, but this was a pretty catastrophic injury, and I think it's going to take a little bit of time. Puka Nacua talked a little bit about that, and I've already addressed a lot of it, but here's Puka Nacua just because it's Puka Nacua.
All the reps, especially like we're talking about this time right now, of like all the times there's no coaches out there, you're not really running in places, you're just throwing the ball, you're watching him run, be like, all right, he gets out of the break like this, or he's running like this. And yeah, reps are important. You don't get a lot of them.
Yeah, and that's within the season or in the off season. I don't worry as much about that. CJ has shown that he's very capable of adapting to new wide receivers and forming a relationship with them. If they draft a Buka or Matthew Golden, I guess that's the big question. That I see, I'm trying to shy so far away from draft talk that I've ignored that completely. How far can Matthew Golden or Emeka Buka, or that's not going to be McMillan most likely, any of those guys, how quickly can they assimilate? We've seen rookie wide receivers, both here with the Texans and Tank Dell, and then around the league in recent years, have an immediate impact if teams just know how to utilize their strengths and then have the other stuff come along the way. So I'm relatively optimistic that if they do draft a wide receiver, we're going to see some production out of him, but it's a huge wild card. When it comes to Nick Caley and what can he do for CJ above and beyond shoring up pass protection, establishing a run game, I think the big question in a lot of our minds is, how much can CJ be involved in the pass protection, and how much can he help himself out in that regard? Is he going to have the authority to really set the protections and tweak the protections. And we saw him do it in just little fits and spurts last year, but it never felt like CJ had really a lot of input other than checking to a preordained call before the snap, checking out a pass and into the run, and just the very simplest of things. CJ is very much wired to be that guy that can watch enough film to know the tells and to know and understand, all right, are these guys actually blitzing, or they just want me to show blitz? And what we saw last year at times was defenses would dictate terms to the Texans offense. They would line up in a look that they knew the Texans were probably going to change to full turn protection or something primitive like that. And all of a sudden, you're going to have Dalton Schultz matched up on a stud defensive end, or you're going to have Blake Fisher solo on a stud defensive end. That's the part where it's on Nick Caley and it's also on CJ Stroud that you got to always start with the basics, but build to that. And I think CJ is very, very capable of doing that. There's no part of me that thinks that CJ can't develop that over time. But even with the really good quarterbacks, that's something that usually is year 3, year 4, year 5, where they take it to that next level mentally. No matter how smart they are, no matter what their Wonderlic is, there's a certain amount of just like kind of learning to drive a stick shift. You got to think your way through it. And before you want to go and drive a NASCAR in a competitive situation, you got to be sure that you get the reps and that you're doing it. Hopefully he can develop that relationship with Nick Caley and come along, because this is the year. Year 3 is when everything just kind of starts clicking for quarterbacks, especially like CJ Stroud, where they're more dialed in on the mental side of the game. So how much they entrust CJ with that. And then I think the other big jump that CJ can take this year, and I think he took a step forward last year, except that he was in a tough situation, is just simply on the leadership side of things and the demanding side of things. We saw CJ in training camp. We saw him at times stop practice, bring everybody up, and kind of, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't know whether he was dressing them down or giving them words of encouragement. By body language, I would say he was given a little bit of a hard talking to. But he also, I think, in his mind, is a guy who shows deference to the veteran players and whatnot. He had an offensive lineman in front of him that had Laramie Tunsil, a vet, as he described him, and in an environment there where I don't know what the drama was or whose fault it was or anything. I think there was some dysfunction in the offensive line. And I'm being 100% sincere in this. Did it come from Strausser, the offensive line coach? Did it come because Bobby Slowick wasn't communicating properly or didn't have a good plan for them as to how to operate? Was it from the players themselves? I have zero clue. I have hunches, but I have zero actual clue to speak exactly how it was going. But it was a dysfunctional situation with the offensive line, with Bobby Slowick, whatever it might be. The blame game's a whole nother soap opera. I think in having what in a lot of ways is a brand new offensive line, CJ can take another step in terms of leadership and expectations for what he needs and can demand out of his offensive line that he wouldn't have had last year just because he'd only been in the league for a couple of years. I see there's a CJ growing a beard conversation. Bearded Schaub, remember, was one of the very best versions of Matt Schaub that we saw for about 1.5 games going back, or at least maybe it was a half game versus the Jaguars when he showed up with a beard, and then and he looked really good for 2 drives, and then he lost all the magical powers of having a beard. Let's see. I love CJ and I believe in him, but last year when they showed him on the sidelines, it looked like his puppy had just died. That's an interesting one. When it comes to body language, CJ's very serious. I think that in the pre-draft process, a lot of people almost judged CJ on the fact, and they used it against him, or at least it seemed like some people wanted to use it against him, that he's a really serious guy, that he's very earnest about his job, and that they weren't quite sure to get a read on him. Do you need to be bubbly, happy-go-lucky, or do you need to be kind of like, I don't care that much about football, like Andrew Luck? I prefer, I'll take the CJ side of it. The big body language one was the CJ breaking down after the Tank Dell injury, and which to me, honestly, and I tried not to be too cold-hearted when I talk about this, but there is a separation. Like there's a certain stoicism that you need out of your quarterback to where you can separate the emotion from the guy who's the leader and in charge. To, if you use a military analogy, hey, look, and coaches love to talk about we're going to war, we're warriors. Players love to call themselves soldiers and everything. All right, if you want to play that analogy out, actual soldiers in leadership positions, they gotta put aside a lot of personal feelings and emotions in the middle of a battle. And I remember reading General Petraeus in his book talking about in the first Gulf War, when they were in that initial surge towards Baghdad, how he looked over to his right and he saw a plume of smoke and thought that one of his best friends in the world had just had his tank destroyed. And he just consciously thought in that moment, like, nope, got to keep going, got to stay focused, got to do all that. Turned out the happy ending was that the guy was alive. But like there's a certain level of stoicism that I think hopefully comes with age and maturity. I don't like crushing CJ about that. I think it was just a unique moment. CJ's been out of the spotlight this offseason. It'd be cool to see him racked up with a beard. CJ being out of the spotlight is a story that I don't want to talk about, and yet that I'm pleasantly encouraged by. I'm trying not to be a grumpy old man about things, and just like, I don't like these guys going on podcasts. They're going to go on podcasts. But CJ himself after the season said basically that he didn't know what he didn't know going into this season, that he thought he knew what it took to be in what it meant and how much pressure there was to be a franchise quarterback or to be the guy. And it was an eye-opener for him in a lot of ways. And I think that I don't think CJ, lost focus. It's not like he was running around like Johnny Manziel or anything out there. But I think there's probably maybe of a back to basics, wearing a hair suit while you're watching film type of monasticism. He's going to go Kobe this offseason, and I'll be cool with it. Oh, by the way, it's property tax season. This is a sponsored video. Ownwell can save you money on your property taxes. I just watched Draft Day for the very first time, so I incorporated Draft Day into some of my the Twitter video I'm putting out here. This is the world premiere of my Draft Day ad that I need to post on Twitter later today. Draft is a stressful time of year. Not to mention you've got income taxes and you're getting a notice about your property taxes. And a lot of times your assessment is unfair. You shouldn't be paying as much as you do in property taxes. Oh, you can protest your property taxes. Not fun. I did it a few years ago with a previous residence. I wish I had known about Ownwell, because you can sign up in under 3 minutes and they handle everything from start to finish. You don't pay a cent unless they lower your property taxes. 86% of their customers save money on their taxes with an average savings of over $1,100. So click on my link below to go to ownwell.com and join the over 300,000 customers who have challenged their tax. Yeah, and yada 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 yada. Click the link below if you got your appraisal notice and you don't agree with it. Just click on it. This is Ownwell's a good company. I have referred my family and friends to them. I currently have a really good appraisal, so I'm keeping quiet about it. That's it. Frankly, they've been ignoring me for far too long. Would I trade up before the draft? Would I trade DP before? Oh, Damen Pierce before the draft. I think they're going to play it out with Damen Pierce. And I'm all for it. Look, we've seen the upside of Damen Pierce. I talked with one member of another NFL team's front office during training camp and talking to him about Damen Pierce. And he just flat out said, we love Damen Pierce. He didn't say, I love Damen Pierce. He said, we love Damen Pierce. This is a team that was more of a gap scheme type of team. And I think probably looks at Damen Pierce is still probably could very much still be really good in a team that runs a lot of duo or a lot of power, inside zone, all that kind of stuff. And I think Nick Caley, having spent a lot of time in New England and with the Rams where they're more gap scheme oriented these days, I think he probably sees the upside in Damen Pierce. So I think they're going to give it one more run with Damen Pierce and see what exactly they can get out of him. Because the upside is right there. He's done it. It's not just in college. He's done it in the NFL. He was very open about how hard a time he had adapting to Bobby Sloak's scheme. And I don't want to say I'm optimistic, but I'm very much keeping it open that we can get the very best version of Damen Pierce that we saw flash at times against New England last year in the Tennessee game. So I don't think they try to do it. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I should do this. Gap scheme and zone scheme. If you can think, all right, if you are 35 years old or older, maybe 40 years old or older, you probably ran some version of a gap scheme in high school. Like, this is old school. It's I'm blocking this guy, you're blocking that guy, or we're gonna double team this guy and drive him up into the linebacker's back, or with power and counters, some of just the old school concepts where you have a pulling guard. It's more just straight line. I'm going to block that guy and take him out, and the hole's going to be right there. Where I'm running in the 2-hole. I'm running in the 4-hole. Zone scheme, if you can think about just offensive linemen when they move laterally at the line of scrimmage, they all pick up and step towards the sideline. It's more of a flowing and timing and rhythm, and you don't always know exactly where the hole is going to be. The running back has to make a decision about whether he's going to bounce it outside or inside. Running backs have to make reads based off middle linebackers and safeties in ways that they don't necessarily have to in a gap scheme. So it's a lot more nuanced, and it's harder for some running backs to latch onto that. And it used to be the zone schemes were a relative rarity in the NFL, but teams like the Broncos back in the day in the 90s were really, really good at it. And guys like Arian Foster, who were not highly regarded as traditional running backs, just had a knack for running in schemes like that. Because it's, on the Arian the Poet with a sense of timing and meter and all that stuff. He just had a feel for it, and he was really good with it. So, I mean, most teams run both styles of plays in today's modern NFL, but there's some teams that lean more heavily into gap scheme versus zone scheme. So it gets nuanced, and you don't want to make it sound like it's just either or. But I think a lot of what they were asking Damen to do last year might have been Damien's better served in a scheme where he can just say, like, nope, I'm going to run it through the 2-hole. I'm going to run it through the 4-hole. I'm going to run it outside, whatever it might be. Just show me the blockers and let me run behind them. He's more of that bam, bam type of player. And I think that's probably what suits him best. Let's see. That makes sense. It also gives more context to the failures and lack of communication and synchrony with the O-line last year. Yeah, and that's one thing that, Chris Strausser had been in schemes that ran a lot of zone before, but not quite in the same way that a Kubiak-Shanahan system does. And they talked openly about it. Bobby Slowick in that first year said that Strausser had never been in a scheme like this. Chris Strausser, the offensive line coach. And it just felt like Strausser and Slowick might never have been on the same page. The other deceptive thing about zone schemes, and, you guys who have seen Drew Hodgson, my old teammate on here, he's very, very smart dude, and he coaches high school football now. Yeah, the way he framed it was that the old saying is that you can learn the playbook in an hour, but it takes a lifetime to learn the techniques and everything that it takes into executing a zone-based system, because there's a lot of technique by the offensive lineman, like just actual hand and foot technique, but then there's also a lot of timing and reads and everything else that goes into it, that it's just not as simple as, hey, we've got these guys that look like they'd be good in a zone scheme. Let's go ahead and run it. And it's a lot harder to execute. It's kind of like saying you're going to run the full court press in basketball. And good luck getting your guys to do it. That's more of an effort and conditioning thing. But it looks simple and great when it's executed well, but it's much, much harder to execute than it looks. Like the crane kick. Any of you tried to get yourself out of trouble with a crane kick back in the day because you saw Ralph Macchio do it? You realize, like, oh, okay, there must be more to this crane kick because the bullies sure can defend. Yeah, zone requires more running back vision. Yep. So it comes down to the running backs too. Guys that have a really good feel and really good vision, like Arian Foster, thrive in it. And they can some of the things that are less testable and the things that you don't see at the combine, guys really thrive. And some unheralded running backs end up doing really well because they don't check off all the traditional boxes, but they just got a feel for it. And this is the question of the day. What scheme is Nick Caley going to run? If you go back to his influence, both with the Patriots and the Rams, in New England, there was no New England system. The New England offensively and defensively, when Belichick was there and where Caley was for a longer chunk of time in his NFL career, they changed their scheme year in and year out based on the strengths of their players. And there'd be some years where they were a pass-based system. There'd be other years where they leaned into the run, and whatever plays were going to work versus an opponent, this is where the game plan offense comes in. They were going to run those plays, and you couldn't really define what type of an offense they were. The reason they were able to do that, and I think the reason that Bill O'Brien was never able to quite have that game plan offense, is that it requires a lot of really good coaching. The Patriots for a long time had one of the best offensive line coaches this century in Dante Scarnecchia. So they were able to mix and match and kind of do different things from week to week. The coaching really, really matters. Cole Popovich had one good year under Belichick where he was the assistant offensive line coach, and he worked under and had worked alongside Dante Scarnecchia. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden he's an awesome offensive line coach or anything, but he also worked with Nick Caley. And I think if there's one big methodological difference between Nick Caley and Bobby Slowick, just that I'm judging only on background and press conferences at this point, the press conferences by Nick Caley, it's that Nick Caley talks about fundamentals a lot. Nick Caley talks about the nuts and bolts of how you win and win individual matchups. Whereas with Bobby Slowick, I think he was much more of a whiteboard guy. And as one of you guys had pointed out, and thank you for pointing this out a long time ago, Bobby Slowick had never actually been a position coach in the NFL. Spent a lot of different times working on both sides of the ball and in different capacities, but he had never actually just had to be in a meeting room with guys and seen the challenges and how hard it is sometimes to execute what looks really good on the whiteboard. Where Caley is the opposite, where Caley has spent a whole lot of time as a position coach and only 1 year as a pass game coordinator. In my heart, I prefer the Nick Caley resume. And then I also, we know there's an element of D'Amico in that swarm of hiring, or that confusion of hiring coaches in his first go-round, that he leaned on his personal loyalty and personal impressions of Bobby Slowick. And I think he probably really believes in Bobby Slowick still as a guy that's got potential, but he was just way too green for the situation he was in. I think Caley has been better groomed for it, but we just don't know. We don't know until he's the actual guy who's installing the offense. So, I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry, Ezekiel. I think it's going to be a mix and match. So the Rams used to be very heavily zone running based. And then over the last few years, they switched. It was actually one of the reasons that Cam Akers wasn't quite a fit anymore in I almost said St. Louis, in LA, was that they'd transition more into a gap based scheme. And that doesn't suit Cam Akers as well as his zone-based scheme. So, they made that transition, and I think Nick Caley was hopefully very integral and helpful in making that transition from Sean McVay's perspective. He's seen both sides. He's seen both worlds, and I think it's going to be Nick Caley's offense. As he said, it's going to be a Houston Texans offense. Or I think that Nick Caserio said that. Let's see. My understanding is the Rams have started running a lot more gap scheme. Yep. So maybe Caley can lean that way too. Yes, exactly. Blade or bleed, however you pronounce that. If Texans draft OT over guard in the first, would this mean Titus will most likely be our guard? I think that will depend on how that draft pick comes along. I think that, as D'Amico said, they only want to draft a guy. They like to draft guys in the first round that they see as week one starters, year one starters. And a lot of these offensive tackles, I feel comfortable plugging in. I don't want to say you just feel comfortable plugging in. If it's Calvin Banks, if it's Josh Connerly, if it's any one of those offensive tackles, I keep seeing Donovan Jackson listed as an offensive tackle. And I think that most teams are going to be looking at him as a guard. But the guys that are going at 25 in the draft, I feel reasonably comfortable. Tyler Booker and whoever else I'm forgetting. The guys that are going around pick 25, I do think they look relatively pro ready. Every offensive lineman, when I watch it through my defensive tackle eyes, I see guys that are like, oh, nope, he's going to get dumped on his face if he plays like that. Nope, he's going to get speed to power like a mofo if he does it like that. The good offensive linemen figure that stuff out and clean it up in the first 3 weeks of training camp. Some guys like Dwayne Brown, it ends up taking 2 or 3 years. So was Dwayne Brown a bad draft pick because he wasn't good in year one. Of course not. He ended up being a really, really good offensive tackle. But I think right now they feel comfortable with the guys they have at offensive tackle that they can go out and start. If they draft an offensive tackle, they're going to hope that he can start and that maybe Titus moves down to guard. But I think that's just wide open to whatever happens in the draft and then how that draft pick comes along. So let me cut it. I want to cut it short before around a half hour. Please sign up at ownwell.com if you're not happy with your property taxes. And I'm one of those rare individuals who's actually really happy with my personal property taxes. But I've recommended Ownwell to my sister, my brother, my mother, everybody, anybody in the old nuclear family, and even some of the cousins that I like. So check it out at ownwell.com, but use the link below so old Sethers gets the credit. And subscribe. Going to have a draft day review with my friend Drew Hodgson a little bit later. So look for that.